He's in such an uncomfortable position for such a prolonged period of time. He's kind of squirming like a worm on a hook. He is looking forward to the next Jan 6 hearing with a great deal of trepidation. This man is not a happy camper. Hello there, thoughtful people. I'm Terry Dactyl, the Zen Dinosaur. I'm a psychic in the channel, and welcome to my channel. We're here to talk about some politics, current events, some spiritual issues, and things that my guides want me to share with you. And with that, let's just move on to our topic of the day. Our subject today is Mark Meadows. He keeps popping into my thoughts. I see him in a suit. Dark blue, very fine, pinstripe, kind of worked into the texture of the coat. Not visible as a pinstripe at a glance, but if you're up close, it kind of looks like that in the texture. Very light blue shirt, pink tie. A pink tie. This is Mark's version of a fashion statement. He's meticulous in his grooming. He likes his hair cut just so. Wears a certain kind of cologne that he likes. Mark is desperate for approval. He always has been. He will admit in private moments that sometimes he tries too hard to please others. Now, he doesn't admit this in the public forum because it behooves him, he feels, to be manly and firm of purpose and stand by principles. But really, he will gravitate to a center of power, and this is how he became entangled with Donald Trump. He wanted to curry favor with Trump. He succeeded in doing so. And so when he left his congressional seat, he was welcomed in because he said the right things, and Trump favored him as his new chief of staff. And Mark thought, oh boy, there I am at the right hand of God, in the thick of the seat of power, the most powerful position on the globe. And I'm the one directing operations, and I'm the one managing his staff. And this went to his head in an ordinary way. He felt pride of place. He was gleeful about his accomplishment. He enjoyed the power and perks that came with his position. But see, here he goes. He's asked to do something. Trump wants always to do something that bends the rules, that in many cases is illegal, or simply can't be accomplished with the tools, the government levers that he has at hand. But that's no obstacle to Trump. He wants what he wants when he wants it. And the first time that Mark is confronted with something like this, he does the easy thing. And he says, I'll make that happen. When he discovers that he can't, Trump is really mad at him. Because, of course, he promised he would make it happen, and now he's let Trump down. So in the future, he promises himself, he won't say that he will make something happen. He will kind of skirt around it verbally. He'll say something like, I'll look into that, or I'll see about that. I'll see what we can do. He's good at using weasel words. He equivocates. And Trump doesn't pick up on these nuances. Trump just hears a yes, because he knows that Mark wants to please him. And he knows that Mark wants the power that comes by being on his coattails. So he levies more and more demands on Mark, and at first Mark resists out of a sense of principle and a sense of not necessarily what's right or wrong, because really his standards in that regard are a little bit flexible, situationally flexible. He likes what favors himself. He likes what favors his party. He likes what favors Trump and bolsters Trump's power. He likes what screws the Dems. Mark Meadows can be vindictive in petty little ways, not so much so that others see it. He takes a secret glee in it. Behind closed doors he might gloat openly, but rarely where people passing in a hallway can notice. He doesn't like to be seen to be gloating. He doesn't like to be seen to be sharpening his knives. But he does both of those things. And so, when Trump asks him to do something that disadvantages Dems or that throws governmental weight around in a way that favors Republican policies, Mark begins to acquiesce. He no longer says, "I don't think we can do that," or "I'll look into that." He starts to say yes, and then to do his best to make it happen. He doesn't want Trump mad at him. He has bundled up a great deal of his sense of self-worth and self-esteem into being a mirror of Trump's approval. So when Trump gives him an attaboy, it makes his day, at least for the next hour or two, until some problem comes along he can't readily solve or finagle. Because the truth is that Mark is in a little bit over his head. Mark is a beta boy. He's not an alpha dominant character. He actually finds it difficult to run others, and very soon he finds himself being run by Trump. He's okay with this. He rationalizes this as obedience to the president, and he thinks of himself as a person who is there to make President Trump's desires happen. He's there to effect Trump's will. He does not see his role as one of making the White House be efficient beyond what it takes to serve Trump's will. He is not there to protect an institution. If you ask him, he would say he's there to protect the presidency in his office of chief of staff. But what he really means is he's there to protect Donald Trump. That's the limit of his definition. And Mark quickly becomes a yes man. It is in his nature to be a yes man. He will bow to the more dominant personality around him. Not necessarily publicly. Again, he wants to look manly. He wants to look in charge of his little fiefdom. And on small things he can be quite decisive. But on large things, his will is subordinated to Trump's, and he's pushed around by what that person desires. And the only way that Mark can reconcile this contrast between his perception of self as a dominant and definitive and assertive personality is that he rationalizes what Trump wants. He rationalizes why it makes sense. He rationalizes why he should go along and why he should maybe color outside the lines a little bit here or there. It doesn't matter because Trump's the president. What the president wants happens. And that's all that there is to it as far as he's concerned. And so he carries on. And he effectuates what Trump wants to happen. And when he knows that Trump lost the election, and he recognizes there was not a great massive fraud going on, and he also recognizes the tenderness of Trump's ego, and that the man simply cannot admit that he lost. And rather than rock the boat, rather than piss Trump off, rather than be berated and belittled and dressed down, in front of others even, which Trump is so good at doing, the belittlement exercise, the humiliation exercise, Mark does what he does best. He avoids conflict. Mark Meadows does not like conflict. He doesn't like it in his staff, and he runs scared away from it if the prospect should arise of conflict between him and Donald. Sometimes he'll push back. He pushes back in the most diplomatically worded way that he can, but when Donald puts his foot down and says, no, blah, blah, blah is so, or XYZ will happen, all that Mark can do is say, yes, sir, and he goes out and tries to make that happen. Sometimes he tries hard. I see some things pertaining to COVID issues, loosening of regulations, encouragement of governors to be free and ignore regulations put out by federal bureaucracy. So he will take steps to address some particular things that Trump wishes to see happen. Even though this kind of thing is far outside the purview of what a White House chief of staff should be doing, Mark likes to be close to the centers of power, and he does get on the phone and he does make phone calls. This is why he calls legislators later when Trump wants votes thrown out, when Trump wants mail-in ballots disallowed, when Trump insists that a fraud happened. Mark Meadows supports that effort on the phone. So he too is engaged in phone calls, and he personally makes connection with people he knew in Congress in order to support the fake electors scheme that John Eastman is peddling. And all the while, Meadows knows that he has blown past the boundaries of appropriate and legal behavior quite a long while ago, because those are not the boundaries that Donald Trump pays any attention to at all. And Meadows is nailed to his coattails. Where Trump goes, Meadows will go. Right there, his faithful shadow. But the farther out on that limb Trump marches, and the more he foments, Mark begins to feel uneasy. This is a bit too much. It's a bit too earnest. And even while he's calling legislators to help orchestrate the fake electors scheme, he's having doubts, but he's keeping it inside because at this point, he's in it neck deep. In for penny, in for pound. He can't quit now. And besides, if Trump is successful, there's 4 more years in the White House. So he carries on. He stuffs down his misgivings and soldiers on till January 6th. And then his forebodings come true. And like he warned Cassidy Hutchinson, that it might be very, very bad on the 6th. Indeed, it is very, very bad. In fact, it is tragic. And the part of Mark that remains, an ethical man, although it's a small part and has been buried for months, even years at this point in his career, that part of him quails at what he has helped to precipitate, because he recognizes instantly that the angry mob truly believe that the election was stolen. And he can almost believe it himself if he listens to Trump's earnest, confabulated belief in his own delusion that the election was stolen from him. Mark can almost buy into it too. He doesn't mind underhand dealings to secure a position of power and to secure Trump's position of power. But this mass riot, half the population of America is deluded about the validity of an election, and their willingness not only to attack and kill police officers, but the active hunt for legislators, people Mark served with in Congress for years, people eager to find them and pull them out and slaughter them amidst the mob. He's shaken by this very deeply. And when he is called before the January 6th committee, he receives a subpoena that he, of course, blows off. He must, because if he were to bow to that subpoena and give testimony, Trump would disown him, and then the wrath of his God would be upon him. He still likes Trump. He still thinks Trump might, maybe by hook or by crook, become powerful again. He still likes being in that orbit of power, although now its reflected glory is fading away since Trump is no longer in office. But still, he's laid his bed and now he's lying in it, so he defies the subpoena. And then, to his surprise, he really is surprised that this committee of illegitimate Congress people actually refer him to DOJ for criminal contempt charges. He's surprised that happens. He didn't expect that to happen. It makes him a little uneasy, but he knows that DOJ won't do anything about it. And that's where Mark's activities pretty much fade from public sight, but in fact, he goes into DOJ because he is called there. He's called to discuss this contempt referral. He goes with his attorney, and a stark choice is laid out before him. He's in a room with his attorney. He has 2 attorneys, a senior and a more junior one. And there are 3 DOJ officials with them as well. And Mark is given this choice. They will pursue this contempt charge, and realistically, it is an open and shut case. The courts have already confirmed the legitimacy of the January 6th committee. They will find Meadows in contempt, and DOJ will push a maximum sentence and a maximum fine. And they don't doubt they'll get it, because this case is unique in the history of America and is of critical importance to the balance of power and the pursuit of justice. and they will go after him and nail him to the wall. But they offer him a lifeline, and it is that he talk. If he cooperates with them, they will not push this contempt citation. If he tells them what he knows and volunteers information and responds honestly to all of their questions, and they can corroborate his level of honesty from other testimony and testimony that the J6 committee is producing. If Meadows plays ball with them, they will not nail him to the wall. One of them takes some time to describe to him what life is like in a federal prison and cautions Meadows that the feeling about the death of police officers and the assault on the Capitol is so raw amongst law enforcement and the judiciary that even a Trump-appointed judge would be happy to throw the book at Meadows for his facilitation of these events. And it would really be in his best interest to play along. And this hits Mark where he lives, not because he's afraid of judicial retribution. At some level, he recognizes this could be a badge of pride for him. He could be like Roger Stone and Paul Manafort and stand proud above the MAGA crowd. But really, he's afraid. Mark Meadows is afraid of prison. And this resonates with other fears that he has. He fears the buggery and sodomy that goes on in prison. He fears a physical confrontation. He's certain he would be harassed, even if he wasn't in the general prison population and kept separate for his own safety. He would be on his own and isolated. Would be isolated in a prison in terrible conditions. Well, perhaps not terrible, really, but compared to the lifestyle he's accustomed to, it would be terrible. Mark is a little hedonistic, and he likes his pleasures, and he likes his meticulous grooming, and he loves his manicures and pedicures, though he doesn't share that with too many people. But really, at the core of it, at the root of it, Mark Meadows is a coward. This is why when the crowd was marching on the Capitol, and they were smashing windows and doing hand-to-hand fighting with police, and Cassidy urged him to do something, this is why he hid, looking at the barrage of text messages coming in on his phone as his colleagues and friends asked him, begged with him to get the president involved to make the assault on the Capitol stop. And he found himself paralyzed. If he went in and said any of this to Donald, if he relayed any of the pleas, Trump would unleash on him. Trump would lay him low. Not only would Trump say no, but he would also do the humiliation exercise and kick Meadows like a dog. So his personal cowardice in that regard kept him rooted in one spot. He did nothing. He felt he could do nothing to stop what was going on at the Capitol. And it got worse and worse, and he felt more and more powerless. And the reason he was powerless was because he was afraid. He was afraid of confrontation with Trump. He was afraid of not affecting anything good and only getting himself berated or possibly even fired on the spot, because that's how crazy Trump was about all this election stuff. So, the beta boy, who is not innately assertive and who is not aggressive by nature, but who puts on a manly facade in order to do his business as a legislator and an agent of activity in the halls of power, that person, at his heart, the beta person who lurks behind that mask, quivered in his boots and did nothing. And that is the person that the DOJ spoke to when they talked to Mark Meadows, because again, the person who's easily afraid, the person with few defenses, the person who's not innately aggressive in their heart of hearts, quailed before the threat of what DOJ could do to them. Now, perhaps, he could salvage something by cooperating, but if he let them take him through that grinder that's the legal system, he would be forever disgraced, forever scorned, even by Trump loyalists. It's a different thing when a jury finds you guilty and puts you in jail for years, potentially. Years if they knew what he did to assist Trump's abuses of power. And in that conversation in DOJ, they hint that they do know that stuff, and that any charge would also include these other charges. And so Mark Meadows came to an arrangement with them, a deal, whereby he could cooperate quietly, and the contempt referral would simply not be pursued at this time. He signs a cooperation agreement, and that will hold any charges in abeyance under certain conditions and up to some certain level of criminal liability. That's on their part. That's what they're thinking on the DOJ side, although they don't articulate that expressly to Meadows. For instance, if they find he did some crime that they don't have in their sights, or some kind of egregious violation not covered by their agreement, they feel that it is within their rights, and legally it is, to come at him with some other charges and pursue him for some other issues. But for now, Meadows is willing to talk about his interactions with Trump and things like the false elector scheme and the role of John Eastman and other insider things of that nature. And the degree of Meadows' cooperation may never become public. At this point, he's almost in the status of a confidential informant. What they get from him, they don't need to name him as the source of it. He's providing them with leads, with detailed information. He's telling them where to look for certain info, what individuals were involved in which conversations, and their investigators are taking it from there. So Meadows' contribution to this investigation right now is under the table and could remain that way indefinitely. And in exchange, he will not be prosecuted for contempt and may remain immune to all or most of the subsequent charges that fall out of the Trump investigation and the Jan 6 investigation, because he's that valuable of a resource to them. So, this is why Mark Meadows hasn't testified in public. His cowardice got the better of him on January the 6th, and his cowardice has caused him to fold up and take the prudent path with the Department of Justice instead of going down with the ship. He sees no purpose to that. He can still make nice with Trump world, and they think he's a loyal foot soldier, but in fact he has turned his coat and he is cooperating with investigators from the Department of Justice under the table. Meadows has become disillusioned about Donald and begun to think that Trump is delusional about the election results, delusional to the point of being kind of psychopathic about it. And indeed, that's a fair assessment. And it makes Mark uneasy, also because his idol is showing his feet of clay, and that's disappointing to him as well, and makes him sad, but also gives him a reason to step back more than a step or two in caution, and distance himself from what he now sees as a slow, ongoing train wreck that Donald Trump and Trump world is involved in. This is why he lies low. This is why he has nothing to say to the public. This is why any apparent grounds for charges will bounce right off him for the foreseeable future. But he's cooperating, and he's a good source of information. And meanwhile, he lives with himself and recognizes his poor judgment, and that he contributed to something that he is starting to see as a terrible precedent in the history of this country. He's still a right-wing authoritarian. He's still a beta personality who will follow a strongman leader. But now he's questioning himself on these points, and who knows how he will come out of that decision process. He's putting off making any decisions for now. He's just looking one or two steps ahead. What does DOJ want? How can he get by today, tomorrow? What will he do for income? Those sorts of questions are what preoccupy him now, and that's where he wants to keep his attention, because he does not have the courage to face the bigger issues that his actions have brought to the forefront. So his cowardly lion theme continues, and he's in avoidance land about everything that makes him so deeply, deeply unsettled. And he doesn't even want to admit his guilt, although he admits his complicity. He doesn't like to think of it as guilt, because that would imply he did something wrong. But he knows in his heart of hearts that he did something wrong. So, Mark Meadows, conflicted, afraid, keeping his head down, talking in secret, and hoping one day to be able to rehabilitate his image, and hoping even more avidly that Trump world never figures out what he's doing with DOJ. Not a happy man. There we have it. That's our remote viewing on Mark Meadows. I want to add a postscript to this. I recorded this earlier in the summer when I was just starting to put this channel together. These days, Mark still pops in and out of my mind, only now his energy has shifted somewhat. So I want to take a little bit of a look at that. Today is September the 21st, and in a week we're going to have another round of January 6th committee hearings. And I have a feeling that Meadows is involved in that in some manner. If he isn't testifying in person, and in fact I'd be very surprised if he does, the testimony that occurs, I think some of it will be in part, at least in part, due to leads that he provided and information he provided that helped investigators look in certain directions and ask certain questions. So his influence will be behind the scenes there. Okay, so that brings me to what I'm picking up from him. Let's pause for a moment. Get a little more focused on that. Mark feels upset, like upset stomach kind of upset. I think it's like he's feeling nervous tension. You know how that settles in the pit of your stomach, and it can range from butterflies to queasiness to the burning of an ulcer, anywhere in that range of, I'm feeling it in my gut, whatever that looks like for the individual. For him, he's definitely feeling it in his gut. He's taking in acid, I think, and he's not sleeping well. Fundamentally, he's nervous. He knows that more things are coming to light and have come to light, and he feels concerned that it will become evident or is already apparent to the MAGA crowd that Mark Meadows is responsible for much of the FBI investigation into Trump. The documents that were withheld, he knew a great deal about that. And although he had said at one point to reporters that there was nothing in those boxes but newspaper clippings, or I don't remember if that was he said to reporters or to someone in an official capacity, but the fact that he had said misleading things earlier is now public knowledge in reportage. And he's nervous because he was lying then, but he told the FBI the truth about what he did know or what he suspected. And that has painted an ugly picture about what Trump has been doing. And Mark found himself confessing to things that he was being willfully ignorant of when they were occurring. He was choosing to turn a blind eye and not connect the dots. Like after intelligence briefings, sometimes Trump would ask for a particular document, quote unquote, for his review, and occasionally Mark would be in contact with that paperwork himself and was aware that those documents were not being returned to the appropriate classified authority that had provided them. He would see them sitting on Trump's desk, unguarded, essentially, in the White House, and sometimes just casually shuffled into a drawer. And he didn't ask what happened to them later, but later they would not be seen. They'd no longer be on the desk, or apparently not even in the desk drawers. and he didn't know what happened to them, but he didn't want to ask either. But he did inform the FBI of this sort of behaviors, and had a lot more to say as well about what he knew, what was at Mar-a-Lago and in other locations. So Meadows has played a fundamental role in blowing the whistle on some of Trump's illicit doings. It goes far beyond paperwork. I'm not prepared to say more about this during this reading. This is something I need to sit with and do a real deep dive on. But for now, I will simply say Meadows is kind of tied up in knots, not necessarily because of anything that is public now or will become public soon, very soon, like during the next J6 hearings, but simply because he knows what his contribution to this denouement has been, and he's all wadded up tight because of it. He thinks of it as duplicity, as necessary duplicity. He feels like he's being unfaithful to Trump or lying by omission, by not picking up the phone and telling Trump what he's been doing. But he knows that if he did confessions, he would not get a "I forgive you" from Trump. Instead, he knows it would trigger a tirade of bad consequences, as well as a lot of emotional venting he doesn't need to be subject to right now, or he doesn't want to be subject to. So he wants to keep himself out of the line of fire, and he's concerned that the more info comes out, it's going to become evident that he's the only possible source for that information. And yet, he recognizes the criminality attached to these activities and doesn't want to go down with that ship. He doesn't want to be tarred with that brush. And so that's why he's felt compelled to tell all, or as much as he feels that he can, or that he feels that he should. So anyway, Mark has been going through this process. It's been going on for months now, and he's pretty frazzled. It's taken a big toll on him. He's being forced into a position where he has to ask himself deeply searching, personal, internal questions about his ethics, about his lack of ethics, about the morality of his choices, about his need for approval and what it led him to do, and how he rationalized it all. So he hasn't come to terms with any of that yet, really, but he is in a process now of starting to ask himself those questions. He's in such an uncomfortable position for such a prolonged period of time. He's kind of squirming like a worm on a hook, and he's asking himself now, how did I get in this position? That really is a fundamental question all of us need to ask at some point when we're doing soul searching. But Mark is kind of going through his own little dark night of the soul here. There's no quick solution to it. He needs to work his way through this process, but that's the process that he's in right now. And right now, he doesn't yet have answers. He has some insights, and he feels like he's questing for more, and he must find some answers for himself, come to terms with this in a way that gives him peaceful resolution to the stress of it all, because he's in a place of great psychological angst and discomfort. So this is one of those things where the only way out is through it. He can't avoid it. He's fearful of consequences. He's unhappy with the circumstances. He's kicking himself for getting into this circumstance in the first place. And that's where his self-questioning is starting, looking at his own actions and going, oh man, why did I do that thing then? Or if only I'd said no that one time, and so on and so forth. So that's what he's doing right now. And he's also fearful for his physical safety. He's concerned that rabid Trump supporters, MAGA extreme loyalists, will connect the dots and figure that he is to blame for trouble that has landed at Trump's doorstep and come after him. so he fears that there may be a target on his back. The FBI is providing him protection right now, or FBI. I say FBI, but all I can see for sure is some element of DOJ. U.S. Marshals, maybe? In any case, he seems to have some level of protection around him, specifically for that reason, because he's said enough now he could become a target if he's pinpointed by bad actors. So that is Mark's situation, and he is looking forward to the next Jan 6 hearing on the 28th of September with a great deal of trepidation. This man is not a happy camper. That's what's up with Mark right now, and he's still continuing to give information to DOJ. All right, so that's where things are right now, and that's the last of my remote viewings on Mark Meadows. I hope you're having a much better day, week, month than he is. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.